Hi everybody, this is Michael Roberts, and we're on my YouTube channel with a special occasion because I have Raquel Varela from Portugal here to discuss her new book on Portugal. And Raquel is a leading labour historian who's written many books from a Marxist perspective. So this is a golden opportunity to discuss with her the nature of the situation in Portugal in the past and now, so the readers here, particularly those in Latin America, in Brazil and so on, can experience the developments that we're having in Portugal. So Raquel, can you tell me the title of this book and what it's about?
Well, first of all, it's a great pleasure to be here, and hello to everyone. You've been a big inspiration when I started reading your blog almost 20 years ago.
Yeah, well, I'm getting older and older.
Oh, no. And, well, the ability you have to debate in a very serious way and open to contradictory, and also the pedagogical way you write your blog. It's an inspiration to all of us, and the way we can use this also to change in militancy. So it's both academic and political work, which is...
But this is not about me.
Yes, but I had to say.
Can we have your
yes,
nature of your book?
Well, thank you very much for being here. The last book we have published, I wrote it with Roberto Della Santa, a sociologist, is A People's History of Portugal in the last 200 years. We wanted, first of all, to do a history of primitive accumulation in Portugal from a global perspective. So have a connection with both Africa, Brazil, and Europe, because Portugal is, in our hypothesis, as well, it is not in our hypothesis, but everyone agrees, a semi-peripheral country, if you look to the world division of states. But Portugal, it doesn't have an autonomous industrial revolution, is part of, we follow a little bit Ellen's Wood hypothesis of Britain as export capitalism, and Portugal is part of this exportation of capitalism. And also our hypothesis, so we try to understand the Portuguese development and the bourgeoisie from this point of view, and also from the point of view is that it's very stressed by the bourgeoisie nowadays that Portugal has the longest borders in Europe, 8 centuries of borders. But we discussed that Portugal, from the point of view of a modern nation state, is one of the youngest. We are inspired by Lenin's theory of I'm not sure if I could well translate it to English, but a Prussian Prussian way to capitalism, which is a hyper late development of a tradition of a transition to modernity from the point of view of nation state, which is Lenin refers Prussia against the French transition, because the French transition is based on a national popular revolution that can incorporate huge parts of the population in their revolutionary process against the aristocracy, while the Prussian is a kind of a revolution from above, to use a Gramscian concept, a passive revolution.
Is that approach unique to Portugal or anywhere else?
No, it's not unique to Portugal, but we found it very interesting to debate now, because we are debating, we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Carnation Revolution, and with a worldwide, with a world increase of extreme right impulse. And what we are debating is that in the case of Portugal, as well, other cases, is not unique of Portugal, but in Portugal, the bourgeoisie to found his nation state, and the nation state that has found the bourgeoisie, so it's a dialectical relation. You cannot have a bourgeoisie without a nation state, and so it's a dialectic relation. They have the final moment of this nation state was the 48 years dictatorship of Estado Novo. And why? Because when the bourgeoisie...
what is this 48 years dictatorship?
Well, it is
Explain to the...
It is a dictatorship that started in 1926 against above all against a revolutionary syndicalism, which was incredibly strong in Portugal and in Spain and in France at the time, and in Italy as well. And the bourgeoisie understood that, to have a notion what is revolutionary syndicalism in Portugal in the beginning of the 20s, which we developed in a comparison also with other countries in our book, this People's History of Portugal. Portugal had one journal of the labor movement called The Battle, that had 25,000 numbers printing, how do you say this in English? Circulation a day in 1919, after the Russian Revolution.
Right.
So the revolutionary syndicalism has made the most incredible kinds of strike and solidarity movements, etc. Is a very inspiring movement, which is, of course, very inspired on Workers' International Association and on Paris Commune, etc. The dictatorship is a dictatorship to make, in order to modernize to capitalism, they had to forbidden unions and political parties.
So they couldn't, the bourgeois in Portugal were so weak that they couldn't have a bourgeois democracy and expect things to grow in the image of the more advanced capitalist economies. They had to introduce basically a state control process.
Exactly.
Something we've seen in East Asia as well, in Korea, other places.
Yes. And Trotsky analyzed also this hypothesis for the countries of like Germany, Italy, Spain, Portugal, etc., that came to the process of capitalism and a nation state, a modern nation state, when there were already a labor movement and not just peasants, as it was in the French Revolution or in the British.
In 1926, what would be the proportion of the working population that was on the land?
Well, the majority were 80% at the beginning of the 20th century. Already 80% of the population was, but there was in the countryside, but a part of that was already working for industry, because they were working at home in this kind of putting out system or domestic industry for.
And was the land built into big latifundio, or was it still lots of small farms?
In the south, as in Spain. In the north was small farmers. So the state, Estado Novo, new state.
That's what they called it.
They called the dictatorship, which starts as a military dictatorship in 26, and then in the 30s as Estado Novo. They needed to make the full proletarianization of these peasants without the threat of a revolution. And the threat of revolution was so serious, not just because of revolutionary syndicalism, but also because of the Spanish Revolution that started in the 30s. So Portugal and Spain are in fact a kind of what we say a unity in our point of view. Although the Spanish historiography and the Spanish and the Portuguese historiography are a little bit, they don't look to each other, we believe that we have an Iberian process, an Iberian historical process. So we are trapped in nationalism. We cannot understand both dictatorships without understanding each other. So we cannot understand the Estado Novo of Salazar, which ruled, without understanding Franco. Salazar was even very important for Franco from the military point of view. When the troops were trapped, they could cross Portugal to fight the Republicans and also the revolutionary, the Spanish Revolutionary. And when the Carnation Revolution came in 1974, Francoism could not survive.
Yes, I was going to say, both seem to be simultaneous.
Yes.
Can you explain the connection between that? You say actually the Carnation Revolution, as it's called in Portugal, with the end of Salazar in 1974, just 2 years before Franco. Is that right?
But it's not just 2 years before Franco, because this is let's say, the institutional date, because immediately after the Carnation Revolution, I've made a research on this on the beginning of my PhD thesis 20 years ago, the impact of the Portuguese Revolution in the Spanish transition, and many colleagues in Spain also have analyzed this immediately. In the students, in the military in Spain, in the political parties, there are immediately change, and in all, even the most reactionary news, there is a debate like, let's open before we have a revolutionary process in Spain, by example from what's going on in Portugal. So even before Franco died in the late 75 and the Cortes self-suspended their work and they started this transition.
They were starting to move towards a bourgeois democracy.
And
because they
also
had to,
the opposite was very true, is because the Pactos de Moncloa, which is a kind of a social pact between labor and capital to avoid a revolutionary process in Spain in 78, when the communists and the socialists agree with the liberal bourgeoisie, some kind of pact, which is the Moncloa Pacts, they were very important to stabilize the counter-revolutionary process in Portugal that has started in 75.
Right.
So we have to look to the countries as part of the same process.
Why is it called the Carnation Revolution?
Well, because, the Carnation Revolution started in my opinion, and of course I'm not alone on this, and there is a lot of good work before my work, but when I wrote the People's History of the Portuguese Revolution, I start my book by underlying the impact of anti-colonial revolutions in Angola, Guinea, and Mozambique in Portugal, because usually the historiography makes a kind of a division, let's say the mainstream historiography or the institutional historiography, which is dominant, because social historiography nowadays, it's really a small part of historiography. They say, well, we have a colonial war, and the colonial war has led to a military impasse or military defeat in Guinea under the leadership of a great special leader, Amílcar Cabral, which in my opinion is not enough studied, because he was a very internationalist, humanist leader. Not by chance, he was, not by coincidence, he was killed, and also fight by some identity sectors in their party, which considered that he was not black enough, was not a real Guinean, because he was from Cape Verde born, etc. So there was
a split in the nationalist movement.
But in my opinion, we need more research on this. But
you're saying that the colonial end of the colonial positions that Portugal still had, although it was very weak bourgeois capitalist power, was not the real key reason for the Carnation Revolution. Something domestically was more important.
No, there are two things. First, let me just say that Amílcar Cabral, Ben Barca, and Che Guevara, they found the trilateral to find some kind of internationalism against Moscow at the time. And the three of them were killed, were assassinated. And so they were a sector of the internationalists in the so-called Third World. As for the Portuguese Revolution, it started in the, my hypothesis is that we just can understand 13 years of colonial war based on liberation movements if you have a revolutionary process. Of course, a revolutionary process in the colonies is not as it is in a city with a democracy, with a liberal democracy. People are not demonstrating or whatever. But why we speak of a revolutionary process in the colonies, as in Vietnam or in other countries, because the liberation movements could just survive with the support of the peasants. And why they had the support of the peasants? Because Portugal is the country that uses more forced labor, and until later, in 74. Which is part of the British accumulation process. We cannot understand, for example, apartheid without understanding the forced labor in Portuguese colonies and understanding that Portugal is a kind of a semicolon of British Empire. So, for example, the miners of Mozambique, they were compelled to work in South Africa mines to break the power of South African miners, and they were paid in gold. 60% of this payment was in gold directly to the Portuguese state, and 40% was in devaluated Portuguese currency of Mozambique. And so what we argue in our book is that this is part of a whole process of world capital accumulation. It's not part of Portuguese history or British history. That's why we need a global, non-national approach to understanding this, this South Africa economy. But what is interesting, and if we go back to the third international arguments of the impact of anti-colonial process in the metropolis, is that the contradiction of this process led to the fact that the middle rank officials in 1973-74, they start to organize against the regime. And they made a coup d'etat, a quite odd coup d'etat, yes, because it's the military doing a coup d'etat to end the war, yeah, and to ask for democracy, not for socialism or revolution. Nothing of this was in their minds. In fact, when they come to Lisbon in the 25th of April of 74, led by Hotel Saraiva de Carvalho, they didn't have any revolutionary plan. They had a very strict plan within the state figure, which was end the colonial war, yeah, and do some kind of elections. And they have asked people in 10 times to stay at home, don't leave home, you should not go to the streets. But thousands of people took the streets, and 1 week after the 20th, and when they took the streets, there were women there because it was spring, although it was a gray day, the 25th of April of 74. There were women there selling flowers. And among the flowers, there were carnation, white and red carnation. And they put the flowers in the guns of the military, which is an incredible art love story
So the military was swept away by a surge of support from the people.
Yes, people just jump into the tanks, not kind of tanks, Chaimites, the military cars. They just jump and they scream against the colonial war, against fascism. Fascism should end it. And the government was hidden in a quartel, do Carmo, and the people just surround. Although military asked people to go home, they didn't. They went to the political police, and 4 of workers, students were dead. And they went to the headquarters of the censorship, the headquarters of the journal of the regime, and they destroyed everything. So immediately what we saw is really like the idea of permanent revolution of Trotsky in motion, because you have an internationalist revolution, which is that starts from the anti-colonial revolution, goes to the metropole, as the Third International has developed this idea, and then goes to Spain and Greece. The Coronel dictatorship just survived.
In the 1970s, we see this across the whole of this.
In my opinion, yeah, I debate this on People's History, although it's a contrafactual hypothesis. I think politically we have to debate it. It is that there were an attempt to do the neoliberal measures in the 70s. In England, they tried to destroy the miners in 72, 73, 74, and there were huge strikes around Europe in 73. And I think the Carnation Revolution has postponed the neoliberal projects until the 80s, because yes, it was a revolutionary process that was contagious already to Spain. In Italy and in France, you had huge votes in communist parties. Yeah. Although they were not revolutionary, they
maximized the share of the vote at the time.
Exactly. And in Greece. Yeah. So I think the neoliberal policies, they were to enter in the 70s as a reaction to the crisis in the 70s.
Yes.
But this is very interesting to debate with you. Because the majority, even on the Marxism side, they look to the crisis as a fatality that essentially will lead to the reinforcement of right-wing or Bonapartism or counter-cycle measures. But in a Marx point of view, as you know much better than I, crisis is a moment of choice, is a crossroad. It's not a moment where the right-wing will win. It's a moment where the state is weaker because the bourgeoisie fractions are fighting, because of the value is going down, so increase the fighting among fractions, and this is what Marx saw an opportunity to the working classes. In 74, this opportunity was done in the most backwardness country of Europe, which was Portugal. Portugal has started a revolutionary process that made possible a red Mediterranean, as the President of the United States said at the time, Gerald Ford. Do you know that the biggest amount of money, well, Soviet Union immediately gave money to the Communist Party to try to control the labor movement, faithful to Yalta and Potsdam agreements of the division of the Cold War. And the biggest amount of money of the Social Democratic Party in Germany was given to Portuguese Social Democratic Party, which didn't exist. It was in a car, they
invented it.
So in the 80s, there will be political conditions, in my opinion, after the defeat of the miners, to go in front with the neoliberal processes. So
we also had a massive slump in 1980-82.
Yes.
Across the world, manufacturing sectors being wiped out in the advanced capitalist countries, which set the situation for neoliberal policies to be applied.
Yes, but the point is that the crisis of the 70s, they tried to do.
Yes, they couldn't do it in the 70s.
But they couldn't do it in the 70s because there was, from the May of 68 until the Carnation Revolution, there was a process that didn't allow them to go further. Unfortunately, in the slump of 82, 84, which, by the way, you are one person that analyzes, but most of historians simply forget the impact. And the impact was huge because the Soviet Union could not survive to that slump. And we had the Polish Revolution in 81 in this moment. I think the biggest resistance came from England, from the miners. And even in Portugal, the resistance in 84, 85 comes from the shipyard workers, which were the vanguard of the Carnation Revolution. And once I went to interview a leader of this biggest economic group in Portugal. They own this shipyard. And I asked him, why did you choose? Because they made the same as the miners. They fight the shipyard workers and they put them 3 years without a constant wage. And I asked him, why did you do this with although I knew the answer. And he answered to me, we have published now in this new book, he answered to me, where shall we start to defeat the labor movement? By the cleaning ladies in the municipality? No, we had to start by the strongest.
Right.
So I think the conditions, I don't think that in the 80s, a crisis brings a regression of the social rights. It brings if there is not a political fight. And the fact is that there was a political fight, but isolated. So the miners were alone. They were not together. The other sectors of the unions, both in England and in Europe, were not with the miners. They were left alone, trying to. That's why I think it's so important, the miners' strike, because it
is a turning point in the
absolutely
in Europe on the neoliberal front, and in the case of the air traffic controllers in the US, the same development. So it's 50 years since the Carnation Revolution. What has changed in Portugal in those 50 years in terms, has there been industrialization? Is there more of a working class? What sort of working class is it? What's the level of income in Portugal? Is it still the poorest country in Europe? And if so, why? How has things gone in the last 50 years since the overthrow of the dictatorship and so on?
Well, I will try to answer this, but I don't have answers to all. Definitely, the next 10 years after the revolution, the bourgeoisie has escaped from the country, and the banks were nationalized without compensation. So we had really a revolutionary process. 3 million people were involved directly in some kind of Soviets, workers' commission, workers' neighborhood. And in the next 10 years, there were 10 governments. So the revolutionary process, the counter-revolutionary process is also a process. It's not something like in Chile, where you go there with the
army.
The bourgeoisie had to do a lot of concessions and a lot of mediations through the Socialist Party and the Communist Party to try to control the labor movement in Portugal. So after 86, after the defeat of the miners and the defeat of the shipyard workers in Portugal, but mainly the miners, which is the key point, the bourgeoisie has conditions to go with their project, and their project was European Union restructuring, which was already going on, well, as in other parts of Europe. And this basically meant privatizations of the big infrastructures and sectors, communication, transports, etc. Change of the social pact after the Second World War and the social pact in Portugal in 1976, which is right to have a protective job. So it starts what is the pattern of capitalism, which is flexible work. And they loan a lot of money to Portugal to build highways that in fact are highways to export assembly goods. So the working class, they have this kind of, destroyed the big industry, which went to Asia, and they have substituted by huge amount of subcontract sectors, and also the automobile industry, which is Volkswagen. In the same region where they have destroyed the shipyard was born the Volkswagen, which is the biggest assembly factory and the biggest in Portugal. It's responsible by 2% of the GDP or something like that. It has 6,000 workers directly and 50,000 just around. And I believe in the dependency of this, we can reach even 200,000 if we speak on other.
What's the size of Portugal's population and its working population?
Portugal has 10.5 million workers. Around 5 million, it's the working population. One big change from the 90s, and especially in the last 10 years, is a huge increase of migrant workers. So now it reaches 1 million workers. This is absolutely new.
So 1 million out of 10 are migrants.
1 million of 10 are migrants.
But not being born in Portugal.
But 1 million of 5 million, let's say, because the majority of migrants are workers. Yeah. So we are speaking of almost 20% of the population.
North Africa mainly? Or?
No, the majority nowadays are from Brazil, North Africa, and also from Pakistan and Nepal, which is also part again of the British and German economy, because they stay usually 5 years in Portugal.
I see. They're on contracts.
Where they are supposed to get discipline of work, and then they can go to Germany and England to work.
Bit like the gas workers in Germany with the Turkish originally.
Yes, that's what I'm doing. The same, they're doing this.
Yeah.
And so this, and the average worker nowadays, the minimum wage is becoming a kind of a medium wage. So the minimum wage was before 2008 200,000 people, and now 1 million people have the minimum wage. And the minimum wage it's even more and more minimum because of inflation and what you can get with this. So what we are speaking is that according to a very important study that was done by economists, Catholic progressive economists, they speak of a minimum wage which can really pay the bills in a decent way.
Yeah, a decent wage, a living wage.
They speak that a couple should earn in 2019 2,400 euros net with 2 kids. Well, for you to have a notion, 80% of the people that work, around 4 million that work to someone else officially, because a lot of them work, but not officially. They are so-called entrepreneurs, but they are not real entrepreneurs. But these 4 million, they earn 80% of them earn less than 1,000 euros. So, and if we look to the pensions,
that's both 2 people working with 2 children, or that's the household, just the whole household?
No. Each person earns the minimum wage, 850 euros, 900, 950. So this means that the majority are under the level of a wage that is able to pay the bills. If you add the pension system, 1 million people are earning 300 euros a month. This is the pension. Because it's a peasant's pension. It's a pension that was done in the revolutionary process for people that didn't have a pension because they were peasants. and this is how they developed the country in the 60s, because they could feed very cheap the industrial sector with the peasants' hard work.
Yeah.
My grandmother was a peasant. She was growing food to St. Lisbon with almost by hand, with no machines. So this was Portugal in the 70s and the 80s. So this pension system is 300 euros a month. So if you use these figures, which are, I'm not even counting what would be figures for the 21st century, honest figures, why we are in the 21st century and children do not play an instrument of music, they don't eat properly, highly quality protein, they cannot live in beautiful places, they just live without gardens, they don't go out, they don't have nice holidays, they are just alone in the mobile phone. I'm not even counting the quality of life. If you just count surviving to pay decently your bills, over 70% of the population cannot do it. This is the reality.
Well, how do they survive?
They survive with a huge amount of what neoliberal always designed, the right wing and the left neoliberal. So the social democrats and the conservatives, which is social assistance. So the European Union, this is something I debate in my book, The People's History of Europe, which is we make a huge confusion, not we, but the mainstream economists and historians, they make a confusion between welfare state and European Union. They say European Union is the welfare state, but it's the opposite. European Union is the end of the welfare state and the substitution of the welfare state by a social assistance state. So instead of you going to the National Health Service with quality or the education system with quality or patient,
point of view,
free at the beginning, you have to show you are poor to have services.
We say means testing.
Yeah, so you have what we call focalized assistance. And this is totally different from the welfare state, because the welfare state is a universal system that equalizes tendentially. And the social assistance, no, it's a manage of labor force.
It's called a social safety net.
Yeah.
So if you've fallen in the net, but the majority of Portuguese are in the net.
They are. No, and they couldn't live without, and then this is very distressing from the point of view of your dignity.
Yeah.
Because you have all the time, you go to hospital,
all the time,
you have to make claims to the state, you are working 8 hours a day, and you have to show you are poor to have access to health or to have access to education. And then you are in a school and the teachers ask, who has subsidized to go to this? And the children says, oh, it's a totally a poverty stigma. But this poverty stigma is in the majority targeted to people that are working, not to unemployed, just unemployed people. So the people that are working cannot pay heating, cannot pay school, cannot pay properly anything. So this is the situation 50 years after the Carnation
So it's 50
Revolution.
years since the Carnation Revolution. 2024, Portugal's going to have a general election. So is Europe. The assembly election, but Portugal has an election. Most, as I understand it, most of the governments in that period have actually been social democratic governments on the whole. As you say, social democracy as a party was invented after the revolution in order to provide a focus for getting away from the revolution, if you like. But the Social Democrat Party has generally been in government. It's in government at the moment. But it's in some sort of corruption scandal, which has caused the decision to have a general election. First of all, what's going to happen in this general election in your view? And what are the prospects for Portugal for the rest of this decade, if you could? I know it's a difficult question.
Well, we are trapped in a huge amount of contradictions, and it's difficult to analyze them all at the same time. And it's not clear. I think our social science are very poor from the point of view of critical Marxism analysis of the political situation, because we have very weak parties, critical parties. So what I'm going to say is probably very superficial, and I'm sorry for this, but the bourgeoisie, the Portuguese bourgeoisie has governed most of the time through the Socialist Party that was created in the beginning of the 70s, but consolidated in the revolution. And the conservatives, they were in power during the beginning of neoliberal power in the 90s and some short periods. So the majority of the periods, the bourgeoisie governs through Socialist Party, which is the name of the Social Democratic Party in Europe. But since 2008, the crisis has deepened and deepened. Portugal has become a protectorado de facto. Do you know a protectorate?
Yeah. So
the bank is controlled by the Spanish. All the investment is blocked. The public investment is constantly going down, and even the private investment. So the constant capital is not renovated because everything is dependent on loans and paying of interest of the so-called public debt.
Well, I know Portugal has the lowest labour productivity levels,
although
including Greece.
Yeah, although people, half of the working class works between 50 to 70 hours a week.
Yeah.
This is official figures, not if you count the unofficial ones. So the Portuguese bourgeoisie is in a huge contradiction because it's almost not, we cannot even maybe speak of a Portuguese bourgeoisie. This is a discussion we make in our latest book. We are speaking much more of a extremely dependent bourgeoisie who has now almost no decision on their investments.
They have no independent.
No independent, and the Socialist Party has a lots of cadres which are specialized on this deal with European Union, which is they lend money to Portugal, you pay it through the public debt, which means now the huge amount of money of the national budget. So the biggest part of the national budget goes to pay the interest of the public debt, and people are literally dying in the emergency line in the national health services. The education is collapsing because there are at this moment when I'm giving the interview, which is the beginning of 2024, 100,000 students without teacher officially. Not even speaking of the quality of the public school, which is dramatically bad. So and at the same time, you cannot go even to the private sector to get help, because in a country where 70% of the people cannot pay the bills, of course, there is no good private sector. You don't have scale for this. So the fact is that, and we had big strikes in the last years, which were essential to the fall of this government. And this is something I have studied more deeper. When we had the government supported by the Communist Party and the left bloc after the Troika, we had a government that was totally anti-union.
So you have a socialist government which is supported by the votes of what's called the left bloc, which includes communists and other groups.
The left bloc is the
more
renovated communists, some small group of Trotskyists and Maoists.
Right. And the communists as well. So they all support the Socialist Party in the vote in Parliament, but they're not in the government.
Yes, during that period, which was, I have to remember now, but it was 2015, 2019, maybe.
Before the pandemic.
Before the pandemic, yes, it went a little bit after the pandemic, I think. And during that period, what we saw was that they stopped cutting the pensions, as the right has done during the Troika, and they stopped cutting the wages directly, which was the policy of the Troika and the right-wing sectors in 2008. But they have made no public investments, no contracting teachers or doctors or whatever, and lots of unions and they haven't changed the two main laws of the Troika for the labor movement. What were these two main laws? Is that the compensation money for fired, it's now maximum of 12 months, 12 days of work, maximum 12 months. This means you have a fixed contract protected by law, and you can be dismissed for 2,000 euros. So this means that fixed people now are flexible, although legally
so there are no permanent jobs anymore.
Yes, this is one law of the Troika.
They haven't got. They were promised to remove that, didn't they?
The Socialist Party, supported by the left and the communists, they didn't do this. And the other law is the collective contract to be extensive to more workers.
Yeah.
They have stopped this.
Yeah.
So this has led to, especially in the vanguard was the dock workers, but also truck drivers of dangerous goods, Volkswagen workers, nurses, teachers, lots of new unions were born. Most of them with no experience of, well, they haven't read what's going on the 19th century, unfortunately. That's why one of the reasons I wanted to write this latest book, because if they read, they would, and they would learn a lot about their mistakes nowadays, because, well, the labor movement had done a lot. And these strikes were, the government fought these strikes, they fight the strikes, and they use civil requisition and even military requisition. They substitute the strikes by military personnel in the case of the truck drivers. And this has led to a big demoralization, because the workers saw themselves, this is a left government which is doing a civil and a military requisition. Breaking the strikes. Yeah. Even they sent to the dockers strike breakers. The government has sent a truck of strike breakers. What we
call scabs.
Scabs, yeah, exactly. Well, and after that, the bourgeoisie decided they could govern directly to the Socialist Party, which has won an absolute majority. But during this absolute majority, the contradictions of very low accumulation, low productivity, no public services, and huge strikes that didn't win, but they provoke a permanent instability in the process of, in this case, of education and maintenance. So we had more than 1 year of strike of teachers and doctors, which is the backbone of the welfare state. And this has led, and also we had lots of small communities against after the pandemic, the strategy of the European Union was the so-called green transition, resilience, digital resilience.
Providing funds for all this.
And the third one is transição digital, transição verde, and social assistance to poverty. So their idea is that the government has to use these loans to put green transition and digital transition. And the populations react very bad to this, because what they called green transition is to open lithium mines, which are destroy the communities, and to devastate trees, to put solar panels, etc. So there was a reaction of the people saying, look, are you transforming the country in a solar panel? This is something of the communities in Spain are also struggling against this, because in order you get clean energy in Oslo, you have lithium.
Have the countryside of Spain and Portugal destroyed.
Yeah, exactly. So there was, in many places, the local populations organized themselves in a very unity way. Doesn't matter if you're left, right, center, because it's the community fighting against the destruction of the land. All this came together, and the government was thrown out in a process that involves scandal, corruption scandal. But I must underline that the corruption scandals are like every day in the parties that government, because and they use this as a way to debate politics, because there's nothing different between the conservatives and the social democrats.
So we have the election. Maybe it doesn't matter who's going to win and how it develops, but just briefly now, because over the next few years, how do you see things going in Portugal in terms of the economy or the reaction of the workers, and what lessons can we draw from the Carnation revolution and the history of what's happened over the next few years?
Well, I see that we can have a government of the left neoliberal, which is the Socialist Party.
So no change necessarily.
No change, and or a government of the right wing with the extreme right. We have two extreme right parties. One that is called Liberal Initiative. They don't call themselves extreme right.
Libertarians, free market people.
Yeah, well, libertarian is a nice word for anarchists in the 19th century. They are these guys which, from the values, common values, they are progressive, But from economic point, they are extremely
Yes,
anti-communist.
they want to get rid of the state. They want
Yeah.
free market, etc.
And then you have
you have the traditional
the
anti-immigrant
traditional
group, traditional they call it,
yeah,
the
well,
neo-fascist group.
neo-fascist group.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the right to government
Yeah.
probably will need this party. So we have a situation, but Portugal, as it is one thing of the Carnation Revolution, which I think is very vividly, that's why the bourgeoisie prefers to government through the socialist parties, because the majority of the population is working class, very poor, and they have the memory of the revolution. It is the biggest day every year in Portugal. Is not the national day on the 10th of June. It's the 25th of April.
So even 50 years later, they still.
50 years later. Why?
Yeah.
And this answer to your late question, because in 74, 75, the things that gave me more pleasure to study in life was the revolutionary process in detail. When you see that teachers occupy a school and they built a program, a wonderful program to the students, they run the school, they stay there night and night and night to do that school. And they have done this in the hospitals in Portugal. The doctors occupy the hospitals in 74, or they put the hospitals in self-management, or they put the private hospitals inside the public system. The people just, they have, for me, one of the most impressive images of the Carnation Revolution is a photo there is in Portugal of a worker. There was this little school on the border of Lisbon with in a slum area. There were no houses and no water because 40% of the budget was to the colonial war. There was no water for the populations. And I shall say that over 1 million people were recruited to the colonial war, 1 million men during 13 years, 1,200,000 men. So it's just Israel was more, in the percentage, had more people in the military as Portugal. So this school, after the fourth grade, the kids had to cross a highway to study the 5th and the 6th grade. This was just what the working classes could have until the 6th grade. Mm-hmm. And some of the kids died in crossing the highway. And this picture is a worker, almost naked, I think with a cigar, destroying a wall. And when you look to this picture, you see destruction. But the story behind the picture is that they have done a workers' commission, a small Soviet in the neighborhood in the revolution. And they went to the municipality and says, we want a bigger school to have the 5th and the 6th grade here. And the municipality didn't answer. So they have destroyed themselves. And after 2 months, 2 months, the school was open to the children. So the imagery of destruction is an image of construction. The wall was being built to do a new school. And this has mobilized people with no alphabetization. I underline this all the time. Lots of people don't even have tooth because dentists
lost their teeth because there's no dental care.
There's no dental care, which today is coming back. So many people cannot even smile in Portugal because they don't have.
In the UK now.
They don't have dental care. They cannot smile. This is how come you support capitalism when people cannot even smile, show their smile, and these people extremely poor, with no proper Portuguese, with no dental care, they have built schools, theaters, they have participated in hospitals when the cleaning ladies were in the assemblies in the hospital speaking, and the doctors were running hospitals, and that's why we had such a wonderful national health service, which is now destroyed. So I truly believe, I'm not a socialist because I'm socialist, I believe in self-working organization. I have been studying workplaces for 20 years. The self-working organization is the best way we organize a society. That's why I'm a socialist, because I really believe that the democracy from below will bring us much better society. Of course, now the official celebrations of the revolutions from the mainstream historiography, they want to show that the military have done everything alone and that the people were just chaotic and crazy. But for doing this, you have to be incredibly honest and forget what happened among 3 million people. This was the most democratic moment of our lives. And why this is so important to celebrate the Carnation Revolution, not just in Portugal, but everywhere, because this is a prefiguration of a society. When you show people constructing a school and running a hospital with their own hands and their commitment, their responsibility, and you are showing that a society can change. That's why it's so important to celebrate it.
Well, thank you, Raquel, for telling us about this and the book. And it's not yet in English, I believe.
No, maybe it will be translated.
Maybe it will, but you out there who speak Portuguese, you have the opportunity to read that book. And thank you for coming and doing this interview with me.
Oh, and thank you so much. And we are in your office, I have to say. This is not a
special occasion.
Yes, we have Marx and Engels here behind us. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.